So how do I have a really difficult conversation with a direct report who maybe is not performing well? Those types of conversations or situations are really difficult to come by in real life, and usually when we do experience it, it's already high stakes enough that we don't want to mess up. And so providing these types of immersive experiences that can replicate the contextual cues and really situation that we can then act upon and practice, I think is really ideal.
Hello and welcome to the Making Better podcast, where we talk about making ourselves, our teams, and our organizations better. So whether you are a business owner, a manager, or a learning development professional, this show will give you actionable insights of how to improve your performance and the performance of those around you. Today, we are talking to Kristin Torrence, an immersive learning engineer who focuses on applying learning sciences, instructional design, and data science practices to design, instrument, and validate XR learning solutions. She co-founded XR in LXD, a meetup and community of practice for IDs and learning experience designers interested in designing XR. And she's an active member of the Immersive Learning Research Network, XR Women, and the IEEE Industry Consortium on Learning Engineering. Kristin and I met recently at a ATD Core 4 event, and I knew I had to have her on because she's been in this world of virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality for quite a while. And now that it's really, in my mind, coming to center stage, I knew we would have a lot to talk about, and it would bring a lot of value to any listeners who don't already know a lot about this stuff, who are kind of venturing into the mixed reality space, trying to kind of figure out what they should do, how to think about it for learning in their organization. Before we get into the conversation, I do want to remind you that if this is your first time listening, make sure to hit subscribe so that you never miss a future episode. And if you are already subscribed, I would just ask that you take a few moments to share this show with at least one other person, because that is how we grow. It means so much to me. Now, let's get into the conversation. Kristin, welcome to the Making Better podcast. How are you doing this morning?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing great.
Excellent. I am really excited for this conversation. I think this is the second episode we've had that largely revolves around the idea of VR, AR, mixed reality, all that kind of stuff. I am doubly excited for this conversation because I just got my Quest 3 headset. This is the first time I've gotten a headset, and I'm just having so much fun with it. So you've been in this world for a while now. How did you get into the world of virtual reality, and what kind of pulled you into it?
Yeah. So have always been interested in game-based learning. That is something that I worked in before working for Tailspin, the virtual reality company that I work for right now. We were creating educational games for K-12, and I got to attend a bunch of these different educational game conferences, which really blew my mind to see what other technology is out there. And I had the opportunity to demo a virtual reality science game where we got to really just like pound different elements of the periodic table together or break apart different objects and see what those elements were. And for me, it just sort of opened my mind to see like what's possible in the realm of virtual reality and really providing learners a super experiential and visceral experience. And from that day on, I was like, I want to work in VR. And
Yeah.
so I had the opportunity to interview for a company, the company that I'm at now as a learning experience designer, and got to work on my first VR game or VR serious game or learning.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that experiential element of it is so neat. There's a particular one for Quest 3 that I'm really excited about for thinking about with my daughter, where they have a Lego game that where you're just like building Legos, like, but it's in your house, right? Because it's you're in your house, and it's just like you can build this big like animated Lego environment. I'm really, it's not out yet, but I'm really excited for it.
That sounds fantastic. And I have to say that I'm quite jealous because I do not have a Quest 3 yet.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm still on the Quest 2, so I cannot wait to get my hands on the Quest 3.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And now so but now that being said, I'm saying it's amazing. And I think it is amazing, but I've never used one of these before, really. I had one brief experience with a Quest 2 that I wasn't super impressed with, but I think that was more the developers rather than, like what the hardware itself. But for you who's been kind of in this world for a while, could you give the listeners a sense of like what is the current state of the technology? What do you see as things that and feel free to focus your answer on if you want to focus on VR or mixed reality or whatever it is. What's kind of the current state of the technology? What do you see it as good at, and maybe what are still limitations?
Yeah. Well, I will say that in terms of XR, it's becoming more widely adopted, in use cases like entertainment or gaming or even marketing. You can see both AR and VR being widely adopted. But I
Yeah,
think what's probably the most exciting for me is that it's becoming more prevalent in the learning and development space.
yeah,
So, either for creating CGI type training where different environments or machinery or objects and tools are being recreated to help with varied practice and provide these experiences for learners. That sort of offering, but then there's also the offering where you can situate learners or other folks. Maybe you have a distributed team and you can all meet in an online meeting room or
yeah.
over a campfire. So is also providing the opportunity to for connection and bringing people together and make them feel like they're physically together, even
Mm,
though they may be distributed,
mm,
which is great.
yeah.
In terms of what it does well, so that brings us to presence and immersion,
Hmm.
and I would say most of my responses lean a little bit more on the virtual reality side, just because that's the area that I sort of focus on. But what it does is really provide these visceral experiences. Really, you can situate learners in these really intense or highly emotional or uh, just unique situations where they need to practice and really help build and apply their skills. And I think that's what virtual reality and XR does really well. Where it's not quite there yet, I would say, is probably the affordability of XR headsets. Um, it's not ubiquitous, right? There's still that challenge of getting this hardware into the hands of everyone. So that is definitely a challenge. Although I think there's still a lot of room for improvement for on the accessibility front, but there is, but it's common to provide options like a desktop version option or a browser based
Sure, sure.
option for
Yeah,
folks who don't have access to the hardware or who are unable to have the headset on them.
yeah. Yeah, I know a friend of mine was mentioning he was working with a company that kind of just for fun, probably. I think this was several months ago when we were at like peak metaverse, froth, and everybody was really excited about it. And so it was a big, a big manufacturing company that was holding a meeting with all their suppliers, and so they chose to have it in the metaverse. He didn't have a headset, and so, like you said, he just logged in through his computer and kind
Yeah.
of got to experience that way. I do think that's what I'm most, one of the things that is really exciting is the potential for like the some of the underlying there's differences in what the technology is. There's like the experience, and then there's how you experience it, which are
Mhm.
can be two different things, and they don't have to be tied together, which is, I think that's one of the things that in learning is so often a limitation is we
Yeah.
make this great learning experience in this software, and in
Mhm.
order to experience it, I think that's one of the reasons why SCORM is still a thing, Like why as much as everybody complains about it, it's still so ubiquitous
Yeah.
because it's a universal language versus so many apps that people make to probably create better learning experiences don't publish out in the same way, or you have to go to their app, you create their login or whatever. Whereas this potentially these experiences can be more of a, um, you know, it's just it's code that you're accessing through a QR code through your phone, through a
Yeah.
laptop, through a headset, and you can kind of experience in a lot of different ways. So there is an accessibility piece, and then also to the point that you mentioned about price point, that's why I was so excited about the Quest 3. I mean, like the Vision Apple Pro is great, and I'm sure it's going to be amazing, but it's $3,500. Like
Yeah.
that, whoa. Not to say that $500 is cheap, but it's a lot cheaper than $3,500.
Hmm.
And so that price point is probably the thing that excited me the most about the Quest 3, but we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Well, and I think the advances of like generative AI, what I'm really hoping is
Yes.
that sort of applying that technology and other types of machine learning
Yes.
will not only like help folks get in the door of creating virtual reality experiences, but make the generation of virtual reality
Yes.
experiences cheaper and probably provide more access to folks who don't have access to it right now.
Because that was the other part of the price that I wanted to ask you about, especially now if we have headsets that are at like a $500 price point, from the point of view of financial accessibility, is where are we at in that creation piece? Because it seems like that's also been a limitation, is that it takes a sizable investment
Hmm.
in just the creation of it. How is that coming down? How are you seeing that come down? Because correct me if I'm wrong, Tailspin, like kind of a big part of what you have is a tool to create with. Is that right?
Yeah, it definitely. So I would say like the original way of creating virtual reality is usually from the ground up. Everything is kind of bespoke, but I think where we've gone in the last couple of years, and Tailspin being one of the companies that offers this, is no code virtual
Yeah,
reality
yeah,
experiences. And I think that provides options for most people who do not have access to developers or hiring, multiple contractors to develop these Unity generated experiences. It provides access to those who are creating and makes it easier to bridge that sort of gap, while also providing. So one of the things we also provide is an off-the-shelf content library. So we have experiences already created, so folks who do not have a team to even develop can still implement virtual reality experiences at their company by getting subscriptions from our content library.
yeah, yeah. I think that's an awesome ability there, especially if it's built in with kind of the same technology. So you can kind of purchase it, but then you can tweak it. It's templatized. It'll
Exactly.
really open things up for folks. It's going to be
Hmm.
just a whole new realm for us to explore in terms of the creation process, which is so exciting. Um, you kind of mentioned this. We kind of touched on this when we were talking about like what are the pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses, but just straight from like a learning professional's perspective, if I'm thinking about this stuff, what are the times that you think, given where we're at right now, that I, as a learning professional, I'm a learning manager, I should be thinking like, this is a situation where I think XR is a good solution.
Hmm. Well, I would say, it definitely depends on the use case. And what that
Yeah,
use case could
exactly.
be is, situations of either a varied practice or repeated practice, right? So let's say you're operating heavy machinery, and perhaps that machinery cost a lot of money and working on that adds up for the business, right? The purchase of the machine, the upkeep of the machine, maybe even like the site in which this machine is held. So things that are high cost, things that are rare, or machinery that is hard to come by, or anything really high stakes, right? So, and that could be either uh, safety precautions on a warehouse floor, right? That sort of thing is very high stakes. Or even high stakes conversations, right? So, how do I have a really difficult conversation with a direct report who maybe is not performing well? Those types of conversations or situations are really difficult to come by in real life, and usually when we do experience it, it's already high stakes enough that we don't want to mess up. And
Yeah.
so providing these types of immersive experiences that can replicate the contextual cues and really situation that we can then act upon it and practice, I think is really ideal. So, really, anything super visceral, anything that requires repeated practice and also might be high cost. So
Yeah.
I would definitely lean in that realm of like skill procedural type
Yeah.
of development rather than anything sort of knowledge based, right? Because, if we think about designing for modalities, as instructional designers, it's the thing that we think about all the time. We don't want to lean with the technology. We want to
Yes.
lean in and with the learning objectives. And if those are more on the, knowledge type side, then it's probably ideal to go a different route with the modality.
So you're saying it's not a best practice to take the current hour-long lecture that I deliver and just put it in the metaverse. That's not what we want to be doing.
No, definitely not. However, I will say that there are, maybe I can backtrack and say like different types of knowledge could be very useful. Let's
Sure.
take an AR application, for instance, and there is a machine that I need to operate, but I just kind of want a refresher on what these buttons mean, and I can scan a QR code and see an overlay. That is
Yeah.
information, of course, right?
Yes.
And that is just in time information that can be delivered to us readily that is AR based. So there are some different types of use cases between AR and VR that we
Yeah.
might want to consider as well.
Yeah. That all makes a ton of sense. Yeah. And I think back to the time when I was a pilot in the military, and they very much followed kind of what you were just saying of, high cost, low frequency, what was the word you used? High stakes. And, so it was things that were either situations that happened very rarely, even things like doing a complicated instrument approach in the weather, so these times where you don't see the runway until you're 200 feet above the ground. And like, that doesn't actually happen that often as a pilot. But you need to practice it a lot. And so doing that in a simulator is perfect because you can just create the situation, or things that are too dangerous like engine fires and that kind of stuff. um, all perfect ways to use this kind of technology. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So with all that, what are what are you the most excited about, for everything that it can do now, everything that you've seen? What are the biggest breakthroughs that you think are likely to happen soon that are really going to open this up to a wider audience?
I think probably two things. One, maybe the two things are very different. The thing I'm excited about, and then the thing to
Okay.
open it up to a wider
Okay.
audience. But what I'm most excited about are the different types of data collection within these experiences. I think,
Yeah.
in terms of things like eye tracking or
Such a
skin
great point.
conductivity,
Yes.
there's there's so much we can think about in turn and learn about the types of experiences that we're creating, both about the experiences and how learners are perceiving it, like heart rate, other types of biometrics that we can collect to either optimize our learning solutions. And I think that is for me like the most exciting aspect of the emerging tech.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I could pause you on that to double click on it, because I think you are right. And so for people who haven't dove into this technology a lot, in because the whole goal of this technology, both with what Apple's doing and with what Meta's doing, is to try to make the system as seamless as possible. So, for example, now with the Quest 3, with Quest 2, you had little things that you were holding in your hands, and that's how you interacted with the world with these two little controllers. Those controllers still exist with the Quest 3, but there's the option to do stuff without them, where it's watching where your hands are going and you can kind of pinch and in order to enable all that, it's having all of these cameras that are tracking your body movement and, like you said, tracking your eyes to try to see where your attention is going so that it knows kind of what you're trying to select. And it reminded me, again, to bring back the pilot days years ago, the Israeli Air Force in their training aircraft actually put cameras that were facing the student pilot to see where they're looking. So it's like, hey, an emergency just happened, a problem just happened. If the instrument that you need to be looking at is on the left and your eyes are first looking to the right, then you don't know what to do. You're hunting for the answer. Maybe you find
Yeah.
the answer eventually, but it's a signal that there is still some element missing for you.
Mhm.
And yeah, by the sheer fact that in order to make this technology possible, they're having to build in all these sensors, having to see all this stuff. That's a just a whole new level of data. I can see why you're really excited about that because that's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just right in your example, where you're looking in your eyes can definitely be indicators of your competency or your
Yes,
proficiency with any sort of task.
yes,
Um, Also, just thinking about things like different biometrics like heart rate, can your heart, like, is your heart in a high stakes situation? How stressed might you be, but how does that differ from like your response
yeah,
under that type of stress? And I think
yeah,
that is also very interesting and exciting space to explore.
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so that's what you're excited about. What do
That is
you sound like you had another thing that you think is going to be able to open this up for folks?
I and we sort of touched on it before, but the Apple Vision Pro, I
Okay,
think, will be the turning point. And I don't, I'm just
interesting.
maybe I'm what I'm maybe just what I'm hoping, but I'm hoping
Yeah,
for the iPhone revolution or
yes,
revolution to
yes,
happen for headsets. And
yes,
I think with Apple sort of leading that charge, I think other companies and other headset makers will then, try to compete. And I think
yeah,
that competition will eventually lead to not just innovation, but also more affordability within the space.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and for people, I'm excited for you to try out the Quest 3 because at least, so the first thing I did is there was this free game that came with the Quest 3 where these little like fur balls break into your house and you have to capture them with a little gun. And so you put the headset on and you have to look around the room because it like scans and maps the room to figure out where the walls and the ceiling are and stuff. And then this spaceship breaks through your ceiling and lands on your floor. And then these little fur balls start knocking on the door and breaking through the walls. And it's where the wall is, right? These holes in the wall are on your
Oh,
wall, and you can
wow.
look through the holes into this alien landscape. It it feels so real that when the experience is over and you take the headset off, you're almost kind of for a second your brain's going, but where are the holes? Right? Like it was so real. And yeah, so for the Apple, because I have to believe that Apple is gonna do it even better. Like it's
Yeah.
gonna be even more immersive. Um, yeah, I can see why you're excited about that. I think you're right, and yeah, that I think yeah, we're waiting for that iPhone moment.
Mhm.
Um, and surprising to me, it hasn't happened with Meta. Like Meta, all this stuff has come out now that Meta's their revenue is down for their metaverse stuff in the last quarter and things like that. I mean, it's early days, but we'll see. So
Yeah, we'll see. I am definitely looking forward to getting my hands on both the Quest
yeah,
3 and
yeah,
hopefully one day,
yeah,
I don't know when, but hopefully one day,
yeah.
maybe in the Apple Store.
Yeah, exactly. Try it out. Exactly, exactly. Yeah, and for anybody listening too, I also think it's interesting. I'll highlight just a neat Marcus Brownlee video that came out recently where he was talking about the spectrum from uh, AR goggles to AR glasses and
Mhm.
how they're kind of both on two ends of a spectrum that are racing towards one another. Whereas on the goggle front or on the headset front, they're racing to like shrink the technology down to get into a better form factor. And then on the glasses side, they have the form factor that I think everybody wants, but they need to figure out how to package the technology that they need for the experience that we want. And I don't know, it was an interesting take on that because it is a spectrum, and I think, and those two sides are kind of racing towards one another.
Yeah.
If we could shift gears now, because there's another kind of topic that I wanted to touch on with you, because I know you're heavily involved in this, at least to me, kind of new world of learning engineering. It was a phrase that I first heard very recently. Maybe some of the listeners have never even heard of it before. So what is learning engineering, and how are you involved in this whole idea of kind of creating what learning engineering is?
Sure. So, learning engineering, I will say it has been around for quite some time, but the
Yeah.
definition has been evolving and developing. And I want to say that in either 2019 or 2020, the industry consortium on learning engineering had developed a actual definition for what
Okay.
it was. And it's defined as learning engineering is both a process and a practice that applies the learning sciences, human centered engineering design methodologies, and data informed decision making to support learners. And what that means in terms of how we might want to differentiate that from things like instructional design or user experience design, human centered design, is that it is multidisciplinary. So it does include aspects, it draws on different aspects from that allow from different disciplines that enable that type of process and practice work, right? So instructional design, it's still very in learning engineering is still very much heavily focused on creating positive learning experiences, effective learning experiences for learners, not just in terms of individualized experiences, but holistic, right? Creating different environments for learners to thrive. Pulling from things like human centered design and engineering. The reason why it's called learning engineering is because the way in which the term engineering is applying natural sciences to the solving of problems.
Hmm.
Learning engineers apply learning sciences to the solving of learning problems and
Hmm.
challenges. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
that's where that terminology comes in. In terms of human-centered design, it does draw on aspects of um, creating personas, doing participatory design, and other types of human centered design methods to design specifically for learners. And then there's that data and instrumentation piece that is all informative of that learning design
Hmm.
um, and efficacy, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you think about it so much like a practice because, similar to like, say, just instructional design, there's a recent post from Sarah Canistra who was talking about how, you can have instructional design as a title. You can be an instructional
Mhm.
designer. Instructional design can be a practice, and it can be a lot of different things. And I will admit, when I first heard learning engineer, I was like, okay, like is this just another title? Like is this the next thing that we're going to do? We're no longer, we used to be like ISDs, and then we're IDs, now we're learning engineers, and we're just keep trying to prop it up. But it was a conversation with you that really swayed me the other way, because that not to think of it as, oh, okay, now we need to go hire some learning engineers, because I think kind of the point you're making that I'm hearing is like, there almost can't be. It's not like there's not going to be the person that knows all this stuff. The idea is that it is a process to pull in all these multidisciplinary people and fields and backgrounds in order to create the optimum experience. And really what it comes down to, like you were saying, is what's the starting point? It's the learning
Mhm.
sciences, it's the cognitive sciences that is what we're starting to solve these problems. And I know last time we chatted, I mentioned a book that I cannot remember. I think there's a book that's really central to this, that
Oh,
helps people define learning engineering.
oh yes, it's called the Learning Engineering Toolkit.
Perfect. Okay.
Yes, it was released, I want to say in 2021.
Okay,
Yeah, it was published by editors are Jim Goodell and Janet Kolodner. It's available, I think it's published by Routledge. And it's a fantastic, fantastic toolkit. It's a book, and it could be read from start to finish, or you could just take a look at the different chapters and take what you need. That's separated into both like theory and tools. And
nice.
so I I reference it multiple times every week. It's my go-to.
Excellent, excellent. So that's a great one to pick it up. But also on top of that, let's say you're talking to a small learning team, maybe there are one or two people or something like that. What are some ways they can get started with learning engineering or think about how to change maybe what would be the traditional way of delivering learning in an organization and start
Mhm.
applying some of these principles? It's probably super specific to this, it's probably very situational, but based on the people that you know and situations that you've seen, what do you think are some common things that people can do to start applying principles from learning engineering to improve talent development processes in an organization?
Yeah. So I would say if you don't already have a background in learning sciences, I would say, definitely do a refresher on
Mm,
that, because that will really help you provide the foundation for why you're even making certain design decisions in the first
yeah.
place. And for me, in I think what revolutionary was identifying, I'm making this design decision, and these are the assumptions that underlie that decision. And those assumptions are rooted in the learning sciences, because they are the ways in which we know like what works for people and how they learn, right?
Hmm.
That is still a hypothesis, right? That's a design assumption that we're making with this design decision. And that needs to be validated
Hmm.
when this learning experience is then published with our target learners, to make sure it's creating the most optimal outcomes that we are intending them to be. So, like, thinking about everything is almost like this is a hypothesis with this design decision. How am I going to then validate that this was a sound design decision after the fact, right? What metrics will I
Hmm.
now build or plan to collect to then inform whether or not that design decision was sound? And
Hmm.
so thinking about it almost like, and it might be just a mindset shift, but I think about everything as an experiment, right? Like,
Hmm.
we don't actually know, and everything can be evidence informed, but we don't know yet until we have the data to then validate whether our solutions are valid and promoting positive learning outcomes. And so, and knowing about the learning sciences, I think helps set the foundation for making sound design decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. That I would agree with that, especially in a field like ours where many people we come from so many different backgrounds.
Mhm.
People fall into learning for all kinds of reasons. Whether you're coming from the people space, you were a subject matter expert, and it can be easy to kind of skip over that foundational knowledge. So I think that's a really good catch, good call out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I would, if I could add just one more, another,
Please.
and I think this is something that we've seen increasing adoption about in instructional design, is creating experiences that are more learner centered. And so I think in terms of where what you can pull practices you can pull from learning engineering, what are some of those tools that you can use to then ensure that your designs are learner centered, right? There's creating
Yeah.
things like learner personas. There's engaging in focus groups to do co-design or participatory design. There's user testing, right? Or like help doing some rapid prototyping. So pulling from those strategies and tactics, I think refining our designs that are informed by that data that we're collecting through engaging with learners, collecting data about how they're experiencing it or the types of experiences that they are helping us co-design or whatever that may be, using that data to then inform learning. So
Yeah.
definitely iterative.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, closing out here, I'd like to end with a couple rapid fire questions a little bit. And I know it's hard. It can be hard, especially. I know you have a bookshelf there, so you might be in a similar position to me of struggling with this one. But if you had to narrow it down, what is one book or podcast that everyone should read or listen to, and why?
Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink
Ooh,
and Leif
okay,
Babin. It reframed my mindset about
love it.
accountability. I would say it is hands down one of the best books any aspiring leader or team member can read.
Yes, couldn't. That's great. I love. Yes, good, good book. Yeah, that's a great one. Great mindset to have for sure. Excellent. Okay, thank you. What skill has helped you be most successful in your life?
Persistent effort. And just to sort of elaborate on that, it's kind of like a motto in my household. My husband and I, we always talk about how like your goal and success is inputs to outputs, typically, usually, right? And we, it sounds kind of insane, but we think about if you were to reach a goal, there has to be like what inputs would you need to exert so that it's unreasonable for you not to succeed?
Mm,
That requires persistent effort.
hmm Alex Hermosi talks a lot about that. I don't know if you know him, but he's a kind of a influencer of sorts in kind of the business, the small business space. And yeah, he talks a lot about that, especially with sales. Of it's
Mhm,
all it's he says it's not about success isn't about doing extraordinary things. It's about doing the simple things for an unreasonable amount of time.
mhm. That's
And
yeah,
that's
that
yeah.
consistency.
Yes, yeah. So here's, if I could double click on that, do you have any way to differentiate between, because I don't, I'm not saying, I certainly don't. What's the difference between being persistent and being like thick-headed? Because there is a level where you just, I gotta say like, okay, this is enough. This isn't working, or this is the wrong path. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would probably approach that in and funny to kind of just pull from the learning aspect in a more like deliberate practice sort of way. And
Okay.
so analyzing what things are working and what aren't, and for the things that are working, like double click on that, and if there's any way to optimize or shift the things that are not working, like that's the area of growth, right? And so like
Yeah.
I guess deliberate practice in putting in that persistent effort and just being really intentional about that type of effort that you're putting in
Hmm.
and the work that you're doing. And I think that needs to come with some level of reflection and awareness to know whether or not you're just being stubborn
Yeah.
or whether there is that upward trajectory, you know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and kind of what I hear you saying is very similar to what you said about learning design is you got to have some success criteria. You got to have a target. You got to have an end in mind um, before you, because yeah, so that you can have a way to judge your actions and see if you're going in the right direction. That makes sense. What's the thing that you see most organizations get wrong or kind of undervalue regarding talent development?
I feel like organizations tend to undervalue talent development in general in their empowerment of their employees in reaching
Yeah.
successes in the business.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like oftentimes we're overlooked because we're not technically revenue generating,
Mm-hmm.
while I think, we help enable those revenue generators to
Mm-hmm.
help the business. And sometimes that's a little bit hazy, but I do feel like sometimes it's underappreciated or overlooked.
Yeah, I could, if there's one thing that I could change in my life more than anything else, it would be kind of exactly around what you're saying of, in any organization, when you need talent, there are two ways to get that talent. You can hire them or you can develop them. And
Mhm.
I feel, at least in my experience in the corporate world for almost about a decade now, we have so over-indexed on hire. It's just like been the one extreme side. And it might seem super relevant to me because the military is the reverse. Because like when you're a commander of a unit in the military, you have zero say of who shows up to your unit. You cannot go out and cherry pick recruits or find people. It's just people show up and you got to do what you got to do with them, right? You got to make it work. And so they are over indexed and invested in putting processes in place so that no matter who shows up, the unit will succeed. Um, and I think, that is an extreme. They're both extremes, and finding a way to bring that a little bit together so that organizations see talent development as like, no, this is a key to our success. If
Hmm.
we could do one thing, if we devoted our whole lives to making that shift, I think it would be successful careers.
Yeah. And I do think it is up to us, and like having that growth mindset, it's up to us to help tell that story.
100%. 100%. Awesome. Well, Kristin, thank you so much for being here today. This was a great conversation. I'm so glad we got to meet a few months ago at the ATD Core 4 conference, and I'm certain we will stay in close touch. Any particular places people should follow you, reach out to you if they want to learn more about either yourself or Tailspin?
Sure. I'm available on LinkedIn, Kristin Torrence, and also on Twitter, Chris Torrance LXD.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you liked the discussion, make sure to hit like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. As a reminder, if your team is struggling keeping up with the training development demands of your organization, we want to help. Better Everyday Studios is a full-service instructional design team that can help you with everything from ideation to actual content creation and delivery. Please reach out to us using the link in the episode notes below. Have a great day.